Dawn crept across this Callaway homestead like something ashamed of itself, painting the sagging porch boards in shades of brass and dust. The air hung thick even at this hour, promising another day that would crack a man's lips and break his back. Marlowe Cadigan swung down from his bay, flour sacks tied across the saddle, boots meeting earth with a soft crunch. He stopped 3 steps from the porch. Ruth Callaway stood beside a makeshift outdoor cook fire, her broad frame bent over a blackened pot. The bruise spread across her left cheekbone like spilled inks, purple and fresh. Her hands trembled as she clutched a folded paper against her flour-dusted apron. Behind her, a boy of 9 sat whittling, knife frozen mid-stroke. A silver-studded saddle hung on the fence rail. Not hers, not his. Who? Cade's voice came low. Ruth's eyes met his once, then dropped. Drums man. Missed payment. She swallowed. It's legal. Cade stepped closer, jaw tight. The paper in her hand looked worn at the creases, touched too many times. Legal, don't make it right. Let me see that paper. The cabin smelled of lamp oil and old leather. Cade sat alone at his table as evening shadows climbed the walls, a tattered envelope spread before him like evidence at a trial. The paper had gone soft with age and handling, corners rounded, ink fading to brown. He'd carried it 4 years, through 3 towns and more sleepless nights than he cared to count. Marlowe, if I don't make it back, you make sure Ruth keeps that land. It's all I got to leave her and the boy. Don't let nobody take it. You owe me that much. Lieutenant. The signature sprawled confident across the bottom, the hand of a man who'd never doubted his own word. Cade traced it with one scarred finger, remembering the canyon where Callaway had taken a Comanche arrow meant for him, remembering the weight of a dying man's hand gripping his collar. The promise extracted in blood and dust. 4 years late. But a promise didn't expire just because the man who'd made you swear it was buried in Texas dirt. He folded the letter with care, tucked it inside his shirt pocket, and rode for the Callaway place as the last light bled from the sky. Ruth's kitchen table bore the scars of hard use, knife marks, water rings, burns from hot pots set down in haste. She spread the papers across it now with shaking hands, each document a small indictment. Samuel stood in the doorway, still as a spooked deer, watching. Original loan was $200, Ruth said, her voice flat with exhaustion. For farm equipment, plow, harrow, seed drill. She touched the first paper. Never arrived. Drum said shipment got delayed, then lost, but the loan stood. Cade leaned forward, studying the contract. The handwriting was neat, official, the kind that made a thing look more true than it was. When? 18 months back. Ruth's finger moved to the next document. This comes 6 months later. Notice of compound interest. 18%, he said, every quarter. The arithmetic was brutal. 200 became 236, then 279, then 330. Each quarter the weight grew heavier, the trap closing tighter. Now he says I owe $840. Ruth's voice broke on the number. She pressed her palm flat against the table as if to steady herself. Due in 7 days, or the land goes to auction. Samuel's knife scraped wood, a small sound in the heavy silence. Cade picked up the deed itself. The paper felt wrong somehow, too stiff in places, too soft in others. The signature at the bottom caught his eye. Bold strokes, confident loops. He glanced at Ruth. Your husband signed this? Must have. But doubt flickered across her face. I found it in his coat after the fever took him. Figured he'd gone to drum while I was tending the stock. You sure about that? Ruth's shoulders sagged. I don't know anything anymore. Just that if I can't pay, we lose everything. This land's all Samuel's got of his father. Cade held the deed up to the lamplight. The ink of the signature looked darker than the rest of the document, as if it had been added later or with a different pen. A small thing, might be nothing, might be everything. Ma didn't know Pa went to the bank, Samuel said suddenly from the doorway. His voice came thin and careful, the sound of a boy choosing words he'd been holding back. I remember. Pa died the day before harvest. He was going to go to town after we brought in the wheat, but he got the fever bad that morning. Never left his bed. Ruth turned sharply. Samuel. It's true, Ma. You were with him the whole time. He kept saying he'd go tomorrow, but tomorrow didn't come. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a storm breaks. Cade set the deed down carefully, his mind working through what the boy had just said. If Callaway died before going to the bank, then who signed the paper? Drum came to the house after the funeral, Ruth whispered, remembering. Said he was real sorry for our loss. Gave me this deed, said John had taken care of business before he passed, said I just had to keep up the payments. Cade's jaw tightened. The shape of the thing was becoming clear now, ugly and deliberate. A man dies, a widow grieves. A banker with a pen and a seal can write any story he wants on paper, and who's to say different? I need to see that contract up close, Cade said, in daylight, and I need to talk to some folks in town. Ruth's hand found his across the table, brief and desperate. They won't help. Drum holds half the mortgages in the county. People are afraid. Fear's a powerful thing, Cade agreed. He stood, hat in hand. But so's the truth, when you shine enough light on it. He moved toward the door, then paused. Lock this behind me. Don't open it for nobody but me or Preacher May. Samuel's knife had gone still. The boy watched Cade with wide eyes, something like hope flickering there. Cade stepped into the night. Behind him, the bolt slid home with a solid thunk. Ahead, the road to town stretched pale under starlight, and somewhere along it, Silas Drum was sleeping sound in a bed bought with other people's land. Not for much longer. The cabin smelled of lamp oil and old leather. Cade sat alone at his table as evening shadows climbed the walls, a tattered envelope spread before him like evidence at a trial. The paper had gone soft with age and handling, corners rounded, ink fading to brown. He'd carried it 4 years, through 3 towns and more sleepless nights than he cared to count. Marlowe, if I don't make it back, you make sure Ruth keeps that land. It's all I got to leave her and the boy. Don't let nobody take it. You owe me that much. J. Calloway, Lieutenant. The signature sprawled confident across the bottom, the hand of a man who'd never doubted his own word. Cade traced it with one scarred finger, remembering the canyon where Calloway had taken a Comanche arrow meant for him. Remembering the weight of a dying man's hand gripping his collar, the promise extracted in blood and dust. 4 years late. But a promise didn't expire just because the man who'd made you swear it was buried in Texas dirt. He folded the letter with care, tucked it inside his shirt pocket, and rode for the Calloway place as the last light bled from the sky. Ruth's kitchen table bore the scars of hard use, knife marks, water rings, burns from hot pots set down in haste. She spread the papers across it now with shaking hands, each document a small indictment. Samuel stood in the doorway, still as a spooked deer, watching. Original loan was $200, Ruth said, her voice flat with exhaustion. For farm equipment, plow, harrow, seed drill. She touched the first paper. Never arrived. Drum said shipment got delayed, then lost. But the loan stood. Cade leaned forward, studying the contract. The handwriting was neat, official, the kind that made a thing look more true than it was. When? 18 months back. Ruth's finger moved to the next document. This comes 6 months later. Notice of compound interest. 18%, he said, every quarter. The arithmetic was brutal. 200 became 236, then 279, then 330. Each quarter, the weight grew heavier, the trap closing tighter. Now he says I owe $840. Ruth's voice broke on the number. She pressed her palm flat against the table as if to steady herself. In 7 days, or the land goes to auction. Samuel's knife scraped wood, a small sound in the heavy silence. Cade picked up the deed itself. The paper felt wrong somehow, too stiff in places, too soft in others. The signature at the bottom caught his eye. Bold strokes, confident loops. He glanced at Ruth. Your husband signed this? Must have. But doubt flickered across her face. I found it in his coat after the fever took him. Figured he'd gone to Drum while I was tending the stock. You sure about that? Ruth's shoulders sagged. I don't know anything anymore. Just that if I can't pay, we lose everything. This land's all Samuel's got of his father. Cade held the deed up to the lamplight. The ink of the signature looked darker than the rest of the document, as if it had been added later, or with a different pen. A small thing. Might be nothing. Might be everything. Ma didn't know Pa went to the bank, Samuel said suddenly from the doorway. His voice came thin and careful, the sound of a boy choosing words he'd been holding back. I remember. Pa died the day before harvest. He was going to go to town after we brought in the wheat, but he got the fever bad that morning. Never left his bed. Ruth turned sharply. Samuel, it's true, Ma. You were with him the whole time. He kept saying he'd go tomorrow, but tomorrow didn't come. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a storm breaks. Cade set the deed down carefully, his mind working through what the boy had just said. If Calloway died before going to the bank, then who signed the paper? Drum came to the house after the funeral, Ruth whispered, remembering. Said he was real sorry for our loss. Gave me this deed, said John had taken care of business before he passed, said I just had to keep up the payments. Cade's jaw tightened. The shape of the thing was becoming clear now, ugly and deliberate. A man dies, a widow grieves, a banker with a pen and a seal can write any story he wants on paper, and who's to say different? I need to see that contract up close, Cade said, in daylight, and I need to talk to some folks in town. Ruth's hand found his across the table, brief and desperate. They won't help. Drum holds half the mortgages in the county. People are afraid. Fear's a powerful thing, Cade agreed. He stood, hat in hand. But so's the truth when you shine enough light on it. He moved toward the door, then paused. Lock this behind me. Don't open it for nobody but me or Preacher May. Samuel's knife had gone still. The boy watched Cade with wide eyes, something like hope flickering there. Cade stepped into the night. Behind him, the bolt slid home with a solid thunk. Ahead, the road to town stretched pale under starlight, and somewhere along it, Silas Drum was sleeping sound in a bed, bought with other people's land, not for much longer. The bank sat at the corner of Main Street like a man who knew his own importance. Brick facade, brass fittings on the door, windows that caught the morning sun and threw it back in sharp angles. Inside, the air smelled of furniture polish and cigar smoke, thick enough to taste. Silas Drum sat behind a mahogany desk that could have fed a family for a month if you sold it. His hands were soft, manicured, the hands of a man who'd never swung an axe or pulled a plow. He didn't stand when Cade entered, just lifted his eyes from a ledger and smiled, thin and knowing. "Mr. Cadigan, wasn't expecting you." "Reckon not." Cade set the deed on the desk between them. "Got questions about this." Drum glanced at the paper, then back at Cade. Behind him, Sheriff Wade leaned against the wall, arms crossed, badge catching light. The sheriff was younger than Drum, but cut from similar cloth, a man who'd learned early that power came from who you knew, not what you did. "Mrs. Calloway's loan," Drum touched the deed with one finger, proprietary. "Tragic situation. Her husband signed this before his untimely death. The law's quite clear." "Law says a lot of things." Cade kept his voice level. "Don't make 'em all true." The smile on Drum's face tightened. He opened a drawer, pulled out another document. "Original contract signed and witnessed, $200 at 18% compound interest quarterly. Current balance $840. Due in 7 days. For equipment that never came." "Shipment delays happen." Drum spread his hands. "Not my concern. The loan was made in good faith." "Good faith." Cade repeated the words like they tasted bad. "That what you call it, when a man dies, and his widow finds a deed she never saw him sign?" Something flickered in Drum's eyes. Just a moment, but Cade caught it. The sheriff pushed off the wall, hand drifting toward his belt. Drum lit a cigar with slow deliberation, the match flaring sulfur bright. He drew deep, exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "You implying something, Cadigan?" "I'm saying things don't add up." "Then perhaps you should study arithmetic, instead of other people's business." Drum's voice went cold. "The railroad's coming through this county. That land sits right where they need an easement. I've got buyers lined up who'll pay good money, money that'll benefit this whole town. Mrs. Calloway can't work that land alone. It's wasted on her." There it was, the truth beneath the paperwork. "So you want it for yourself," Cade said. "Figured you'd take it legal." "Everything I do is legal." Drum tapped ash into a crystal tray. 7 days, Cadigan. She pays or she's out. And if you keep sniffing around where you don't belong—" He glanced at the sheriff. "Wade here might find cause to ask you some questions. Long questions. In a cell." The threat hung in the air like the cigar smoke. Cade held Drum's gaze for a long moment, then picked up the deed, folded it carefully, and turned for the door. "One more thing," Drum called. "Foreclosure auction's been moved up, Friday, not Sunday. Seems there's been some concern about, interference." Cade stopped, hand on the doorframe. 3 days now," Drum said, smiling again. "Best tell the widow to start packing." Sunday morning came hot and still. The church bell rang out across town, calling the faithful and the merely obligated. Folks gathered on the stone steps in their stiff Sunday clothes, fanning themselves against the heat, trading gossip like currency. Ruth Calloway climbed those steps alone, Samuel walking close beside her. She'd tried to cover the bruise with powder, but the purple showed through like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Heads turned. Whispers started, spreading through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Preacher May Fenton stood at the top of the steps, Bible under one arm, her severe face unreadable. She watched Ruth approach with eyes that missed nothing. Drum arrived in a polished carriage, stepping down with the air of a man attending his own coronation. He moved through the crowd, nodding, shaking hands, playing the role of respectable citizen. When he reached the steps, he stopped directly in Ruth's path. "Mrs. Calloway." He removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Surprised to see you. Thought you'd be home preparing to move." The crowd went quiet. Even the children stopped their playing. Ruth's hands tightened on her shawl. "This is still my town, Mr. Drum." "For 3 more days," Drum's voice carried, meant for the audience. "Then the land goes to auction. Friday morning, 10 o'clock at the courthouse. Public sale. All debts must be settled." He turned to address the gathered crowd. "Legal and proper, as witnessed by Sheriff Wade and recorded in the county registry." Several townswomen looked away. The men shifted their feet, uncomfortable but silent. Everyone here knew someone who owed Drum money. Everyone here understood the cost of speaking up. Preacher May descended 2 steps, placing herself between Drum and Ruth. "That's enough, Silas. Just informing the community of legal proceedings, preacher. I saw your man Stryker." May's voice rang clear. "Thursday evening. Saw him ride up to her place, saw him raise his hand, saw the bruise after." The crowd stirred. This was new information. Public testimony from a woman of Saw. Drum's smile never wavered. "You saw a debtor learn the consequences of default. My associate was well within his rights to collect on a delinquent account. The law allows reasonable measures to secure payment." "The law," May said, "also has words about widows and orphans." "Then perhaps the widow should have kept better accounts." Drum replaced his hat. "Friday morning, Mrs. Calloway. Unless you've got $840 hidden somewhere, I'd suggest you start saying goodbye to that land." He moved past her into the church. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. Sheriff Wade followed, hand resting casual on his gun belt. Ruth stood frozen on the steps, every eye upon her, the weight of public shame pressing down like the heat itself. Samuel gripped her hand, his small fingers tight with fear. Preacher May touched Ruth's shoulder, gentle. "Come inside." But Ruth couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Around her, people filed into the church, averting their eyes, leaving her standing alone in the morning sun with her humiliation on display for the whole town to see. No one spoke up, no one stood with her, they were all too afraid. The blacksmith yard sat on the east edge of town where the wind carried smoke away from the houses. Ezra Holt worked alone as the sun dipped low, hammer ringing against anvil in a rhythm older than memory. Sparks flew with each strike, brief stars dying in the dust. Cade found him tempering a hinge, the iron glowing orange in the forge's mouth. "Need a word," Cade said. Ezra didn't stop working. He was 60 if he was a day, arms thick as fence posts, burned scars mapping his forearms like a language only fire could write. He drove the iron deep into a water bucket. Steam hissed, filling the air with the smell of hot metal and ash. "Figured you would." Ezra set the hinge aside, wiped his hands on his apron. "Whole town's talking about what happened on the church steps." "They talk, but they don't help. Can't blame them too much." Ezra moved to the forge, stirring the coals with a poker. "Drum holds paper on half the businesses here. Man speaks up, suddenly his loan comes due early. Happened to me 10 years back." Cade's head came up. "You?" "Had a farm south of here. Good land, creek ran through it year-round." Ezra stared into the flames. "Drum's daddy held the note. When I couldn't make a payment, drought year, cattle died, they took it. Contract said I owed double what I'd borrowed. Never could figure how the numbers worked that way." "You fight it?" "Tried." Ezra's jaw worked. "But I couldn't read all the fine print. Couldn't prove nothing. Sheriff was his brother back then, not his cousin. Same result, though." The hammer lay on the anvil between them, handle worn smooth by decades of use. "There a way to prove fraud?" Cade asked. "If a man forged a signature?" Ezra turned from the forge, eyes sharp. "Depends. Paper documents lie easy, but fire don't." He moved to a shelf, pulled down a scrap of old contract paper, set it on the anvil. Then he selected an iron rod, thrust it into the coals until it glowed. "Watch," Ezra said. He pressed the hot iron to the paper where words were written. The paper browned, but the ink held, staying dark and clear even as the edges singed. Then he took another paper, one with fresher ink, and did the same. The ink ran immediately, spreading and smearing across the page like a wound bleeding out. "Honest ink? Old ink. It sets into the paper," Ezra explained. "Gets stable. But new ink, especially if it's been added recent, it ain't had time to bind proper. Heat makes it run. He met Cade's eyes. Old frontier judges used this test when they couldn't read or didn't trust lawyers. Called it the anvil test. If the signature runs and the rest don't, you know someone's been writing history that didn't happen. Cade stared at the smeared paper, his mind working through implications. You'll need witnesses, though, Ezra said, and you'll need that deed. Drum won't give it up willing. I know. There's something else. Ezra lowered his voice. Drum keeps 2 sets of books. Public ledger he shows everyone, and a private one locked in his office safe. Left drawer of his desk, under a loose floorboard. At least that's where his daddy kept it. How you know that? Used to do metalwork for the bank. Made that safe, matter of fact. Ezra's smile was grim. Some things a man don't forget. The hammer rang again as Ezra returned to work, steady and deliberate, metal singing its ancient song. Dawn found Cade at the general store, settling his account for the month. The storekeeper, a thin man named Hoskins with careful eyes, tallied the numbers in silence. When Cade paid, Hoskins glanced toward the door, then added an extra sack of flour to the order. Didn't ask for that, Cade said. No charge. Hoskins kept his voice low. For Mrs. Calloway. Heard she's, having difficulties. 3 women browsed near the dry goods, pretending not to listen. One of them, a mother Cade recognized from church, caught his eye and nodded once. Brief, almost invisible. But there. Drum sees me giving charity, Hoskins started. I'll deliver it myself, Cade said. Your books stay clean. He loaded the supplies, tying them down with practiced hands. As he worked, a shadow fell across the wagon bed. He turned to find one of the church mothers standing close, a small bundle wrapped in cloth in her hands. For the boy, she whispered. Dried apples. Don't tell no one. She pressed it into his hands and hurried away before he could thank her. Another woman appeared as he climbed into the wagon seat. She said nothing, just set a jar of preserves on the bench beside him and walked off, head down. The cracks were showing, small ones, hairline fractures in the wall of silence. Not much, not nearly enough, but it was something. Cade snapped the reins, the wagon creaking forward. In his shirt pocket, the letter from Calloway seemed to burn against his chest. A promise made, a debt coming due. Friday was 3 days off. He'd need every hour. Midnight came with the kind of darkness that made the stars look close enough to touch. Ruth's homestead sat quiet under that vast sky, lamplight bleeding through the cracks in the shutters. Inside, she mended Samuel's spare shirt by candlelight, needle moving with the rhythm of a woman trying not to think. The sound of hoofbeats reached her before she saw the riders, 2 men, coming fast. She knew the sound of trouble, knew it in her bones the way animals know storms. She grabbed Samuel from his bed, pushed him toward the root cellar door. Get down there. Don't come up till I say. Ma, now. The boy disappeared into the darkness below. Ruth barred the door just as fists hammered against it. Open up, widow. Time to discuss your situation. She recognized the voice. Drum's man, the one who'd left the Bruise. Through the window crack, she saw torches, orange flames dancing in the dark. The smell of kerosene drifted on the night air. You got no business here, Ruth called, voice steadier than her hands. Got all the business we need. You're 3 days from eviction. Mr. Drum sent us to help you understand the urgency of your circumstances. The second man laughed, low and mean. Something shattered, the window in the back room. Glass rained down like hail. Ruth grabbed the rifle from above the door, her husband's gun, cleaned and oiled even though she'd never had cause to fire it. Until now. You break anything else, I'll shoot. That ain't neighborly, Mrs. Calloway. Then another sound cut through the night. A third horse, coming hard. The hammering stopped. Ruth pressed her face to the door crack and saw Cade Cadigan dismounting before his bay had fully stopped, moving like a man who'd done this before. Evening, boys, Cade said, voice calm as Sunday. Little late for a social call. The man with the torch, silver studs gleaming on his saddle even in the dark, spat into the dust. Ain't your concern, Cadigan. See, that's where you're wrong. Cade moved closer, hands loose at his sides. Lady says you ain't welcome. That makes it my concern. Drum ain't gonna like you interfering. Drum can tell me himself. Cade's voice dropped lower. After you 2 ride out. The first man's hand moved toward his belt. Cade was faster. His fist caught the man's jaw with a crack that echoed across the yard. The torch fell, guttering in the dirt. The man went down hard, stayed down. The second man charged. They crashed together, a tangle of fists and fury. Cade took a blow to the ribs that would have dropped a smaller man. He grunted, drove his elbow into the man's gut, followed with an uppercut that lifted the man onto his heels. Ruth watched through the crack as they fought in the dust and darkness, brutal and efficient. Cade moved like violence was a language he'd learned young and never forgotten. But the second man was younger, meaner, and fought with the kind of desperation that comes from fear of disappointing a boss. A boot caught Cade's bad leg, the war wound, and he stumbled. The man pressed the advantage, landing a solid hit to Cade's side. Something cracked. Ribs, probably. Cade's breath came ragged, but he didn't go down. He caught the man's next swing, twisted, and drove him face first into the porch rail. Wood splintered. The man slid to the ground and didn't rise. Cade stood breathing hard, one hand pressed to his side, blood seeped between his fingers. The first man was crawling toward his horse. His companion wasn't moving at all. "Tell Drum," Cade said, voice rough with pain. "If he wants this land, he can wait for Friday. No more night visits." The conscious man managed to drag himself into the saddle. He grabbed his friend's reins, hauled the other horse close, and somehow got the unconscious man belly down across it. Then he rode off, the silver-studded saddle blanket slipping loose and falling forgotten in the dirt. Cade picked it up, turned it over in his hands. Evidence. Then his knees buckled. Ruth had the door open before he hit the ground. Morning found Cade propped against Ruth's kitchen wall while she wrapped his ribs with torn strips of bedsheet. The cloth pulled tight, her hands surprisingly steady. Samuel watched from the doorway, whittling knife forgotten in his lap. "You didn't have to do that," Ruth said quietly. "Yes, I did." Her fingers stilled on the bandage. "Why?" Cade met her eyes. "Your husband saved my life once. Made me promise if he didn't come home, I'd see you kept this land. I'm 4 years late keeping that promise. Ain't gonna fail him twice." Ruth's breath caught. "John never told me." "He wouldn't have." Cade winced as she tied off the bandage. He was saving it for when Samuel was older. Wanted the boy to know his father was a man worth remembering. The words hung in the air like a benediction. Then hoofbeats sounded again. Different this time. Just one rider, official. Sheriff Wade appeared in the doorway without knocking, papers in hand. "Cadigan, you're wanted for questioning. Assault on 2 of Drum's employees." "They attacked," Ruth started. "Don't matter what you say happened," Wade interrupted. "Drum's pressing charges." He turned to Cade. "You can come peaceful or I can make it hard. Your choice." Cade stood slowly, every movement costing him. "One question first. When's the auction?" "Friday morning, 10 o'clock. Wade's face was carefully blank. "But there's been a change. Mr. Drum's accelerated the timeline due to concerns about interference. Auction's now Wednesday, day after tomorrow." The floor seemed to drop from under Ruth. 3 days had become 2. Cade's jaw went tight. "That legal?" "Mr. Drum holds the paper. He can call it due whenever he wants." Wade gestured toward the door. "Now, let's go." The sheriff kept Cade 4 hours in a cell that smelled of old sweat and despair before releasing him with a warning that felt more like a promise. By the time he made it back to Ruth's place, the sun sat high and merciless, baking the earth until it cracked. Ruth met him at the door, her face tight with worry that softened into relief when she saw him walking on his own. She didn't speak, just guided him to a chair and fetched water from the well. The bucket rope creaked as she pulled, a sound as familiar as breathing in these parts. "They hurt you more?" she asked, setting the dipper to his lips. "No." Wade just wanted to make a point. Cade drank deep, the water cool and clean despite the drought. "We got less time than I thought." "Day and a half." Ruth's hands twisted in her apron. "Even if we had the money." "We ain't getting the money." Cade shifted, wincing as his ribs protested. "But we might get the truth." Samuel appeared in the doorway, still clutching that carved stick he'd been working on for days. The boy looked at Cade with an expression too old for his years, the look of a child who'd learned young that the world breaks promises. "Your pa ever show you his handwriting?" Cade asked. Samuel nodded slowly. "He used to write things down, lists and such. Ma keeps some in a Bible." Ruth moved to the shelf, pulled down a worn leather volume. Tucked inside were papers, inventory lists, crop calculations, a letter half finished to a brother back east. She spread them on the table. Cade studied the writing. Calloway's hand had been steady but simple, letters formed with the care of a man who'd learned to write late and never quite made peace with it. The loops were wide, the crosses on the T's sat low. He pulled the deed from his pocket, set it beside the other papers. The signature on the deed looked nothing like the rest. Bolder, more confident, the kind of flourish a man adds when he's practiced signing other people's names. "That ain't Pa's hand." Samuel said quietly. Ruth leaned close, comparing. Her finger traced the signatures back and forth. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with something that might have been anger or might have been hope. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Drum forged it, she whispered, proving it's the trick. Cade folded the papers with care. Ezra showed me something. Old method of testing documents. Heat reveals new ink different than old. If we can show that signature was added after the rest of the deed was written... How do we do that? Ruth asked. Public test, in front of witnesses. Cade looked at her steady. But first, we need more proof. Drum's got a second ledger, the real one. Shows all the deals he's made, all the land he's taken. If we can get that, show the pattern. Where's he keep it? His office. Locked safe, hidden under a loose board. Ruth's breath caught. You're talking about breaking into the bank. I'm talking about taking back what's been stolen. Cade met her eyes. But I won't do it if you don't want me to. This is your fight. Your choice. The silence stretched. Outside, a hawk cried, hunting in the heat. Ruth's hands had gone still on the table, resting near where her husband's real signature sat in honest ink. John wouldn't want me to lose this land, she said finally. Wouldn't want Samuel growing up thinking his father was a fool who signed away everything. She looked up. Do it. Full dark brought Ezra Holt to Cade's cabin, moving quiet for a man his size. He carried a leather roll that clinked softly when he set it down. Lockpicks and pry bars. Tools of a trade most blacksmiths learned but few admitted to knowing. You sure about this? Ezra asked. No. Cade cleaned his rifle by lamplight, the smell of gun oil sharp in the close air. But sure don't matter much right now. Drum's got the sheriff watching. Wade's no fool. Wade sleeps eventually. Man gets predictable when he's comfortable. Cade set the rifle aside. You said the safe's in the left drawer? Was 20 years ago. But Drum's daddy was a creature of habit. Figure the son is too. Ezra unrolled the tool bundle. You'll need fire hot enough to test both the deed and whatever's in that ledger. Forge burns hotter than lamp oil, hotter than anything you can make portable. So we bring the documents to the forge. In front of the whole town, ideally. Ezra's eyes held a fierce light. Make it a public thing. Old frontier justice. The kind that worked before lawyers made everything complicated. Cade thought about that. About Ruth standing on those church steps with no one willing to speak for her. About a town that looked away because looking cost too much. We get that ledger, Cade said. We ring the church bell. Sunday morning, but early, before regular service. Tell folks we're settling a dispute the old way. Think they'll come? They'll come. People love watching judgment, long as they ain't the ones being judged. Cade stood, testing his ribs. The pain was still there, but manageable. Question is whether they'll care about what we show them. Ezra gathered his tools. My forge will be ready. You get that ledger, bring the widow, and I'll heat the iron hot enough to burn lies clean away. After the blacksmith left, Cade sat in darkness, sharpening his knife on a whetstone. The blade whispered against stone, a sound like secrets being honed to an edge. Wednesday's dawn would come soon enough. Before then, he had a bank to rob. The saloon smelled of whiskey and tobacco smoke, layers of it soaked into the floorboards over years of men drinking away their wages. Drum sat at a corner table, voice carrying just loud enough to be overheard but quiet enough to seem like private conversation, a talent he'd perfected. Just seems odd, don't it? Drum swirled whiskey in his glass, the liquid catching lamplight. Drifter rides into town, suddenly takes an interest in a widow woman, real protective, that one. The saloon keeper leaned against the bar, polishing glasses that didn't need polishing. 3 ranch hands sat nearby, nursing beers, listening. Heard he fought off your men, one of them said. Broke Riley's jaw. My men were conducting legal business. Drum's voice carried injured innocence. Mrs. Calloway's in default. They went to discuss terms. Cadigan attacked them unprovoked. That ain't how I heard it, another hand muttered. Course not. The widow's got her version, Cadigan's got his. But facts are facts. She owes money she can't pay, and he's been spending an awful lot of time at her place. Drum let the implication hang. Makes a man wonder what his real interest is. That land's worth something to the railroad. Maybe he's thinking if she loses it, he can buy it cheap at auction. Swoop in, play the hero, take what's hers when she's desperate. The saloon keeper stopped polishing. Cade ain't that kind of man. You know him well, do you? Man shows up 4 years ago with a war story and a limp. Nobody knows where he came from or why he stayed. Drum drained his glass. I'm just saying, seems convenient. Her husband dies, she's vulnerable, and suddenly this giant's her champion. But come Friday, when that land goes to auction, we'll see who bids, won't we? One of the ranch hands, a younger man who'd worked with Cade during spring branding, pushed back from the table. That dog won't hunt, Drum. I seen Cade work. He don't take what ain't his. Then why's he interfering in legal matters? Why'd he assault my employees? Drum stood, dropped coins on the table. I ain't saying he's definitely crooked, just saying things ain't always what they appear. Good night, gentlemen. He left the saloon with the satisfied air of a man who'd planted seeds he knew would grow. The younger ranch hand spat into the sawdust. He's full of it. Maybe, the saloon keeper said quietly. But people believe what they want to believe. And Drum's awful good at telling people what they want to hear. Outside, the street lay empty under a moon 3 days from full. Just bright enough to cast shadows, just dark enough to hide. 2 in the morning found Cade at the back window of Drum's bank, the one facing the alley where nobody walked this late. The window latch was old. He'd checked it 2 days prior when he'd come in the front door. Old latches could be worked if a man had patience and a thin blade. The metal gave with a soft click. He eased the window open, listening. Inside, the bank was silent except for the tick of that brass clock Drum kept on his desk. Cade slipped through, boots touching down on carpet thick enough to muffle sound. The air smelled of paper and furniture polish and the faint ghost of cigar smoke. His eyes adjusted slowly. Moonlight through the front windows gave just enough illumination to see shapes. Desk, chairs, the heavy door of the vault. He moved to the desk, found the left drawer. Locked, but a simple mechanism. The kind that kept honest men honest but wouldn't slow down anyone truly motivated. His knife blade worked the lock. It surrendered with a whisper of metal on metal. Inside the drawer, papers, a flask, a derringer that hadn't been cleaned in months. He felt along the bottom. There, the board shifted when he pressed it. Ezra's memory had held true. Beneath the false bottom lay a ledger bound in black leather, smaller than the public books. Cade lifted it carefully, set it on the desk, and opened to a random page. Even in the dim light, the entries told stories. McKenzie Farm, $180 loan at 18% compound. Equipment delayed, no shipment. Note called at $620. Sold to T&P Railroad for Ford on Patterson Homestead, $240 loan for seed. Crop failed, drought. Note called at $890. Resold for $3,800. Page after page, 12 families in total. The pattern consistent. Small loans that bloomed into impossible debts, foreclosures timed with railroad expansion, land flipped for 10 times what the original loan had been worth. Ruth's entry sat near the end. Callaway property, $200 loan. Equipment never shipped per arrangement with freight agent, paid $50 to delay, lose shipment. J. Callaway deceased before could dispute. Signature added postmortem. Current claim, $840. Expected auction price to T&P, $15,000. Net profit, $14,800. Cade's jaw went tight. There it was in Drum's own hand. Not just fraud. Conspiracy. Premeditated theft dressed up in legal paper. He closed the ledger, tucked it inside his coat, started for the window. The floor creaked. Cade froze. The sound hadn't come from under his feet. It came from the front of the bank. A key scraped in the front door lock. He moved fast, silent, crossing to the window. Behind him, the door opened. Lamplight spilled in. He heard Drum's voice, annoyed. I know I left those contracts here. Then a pause, the kind of pause that meant a man had noticed something wrong. Cade was through the window and dropping into the alley when Drum shouted. Boots pounded across the floor. A whistle shrieked, the kind lawmen carried. Cade ran. Behind him, more whistles answered. The night suddenly full of men waking, responding. He cut through the alley, vaulted a fence, the ledger pressed tight against his ribs where the bandages still held. His side screamed with each jarring step. He made it 3 blocks before he had to stop, pressing into the shadow of a grain warehouse, breathing hard. Footsteps passed nearby, deputies searching. The whistles kept calling to each other, a net drawing closed. But they hadn't caught him. Not yet. And he had the ledger. The proof sat heavy against his chest, every fraudulent entry another nail in Drum's coffin. Cade waited until the search moved past, then slipped into the darkness, heading for Ezra's forge. Come morning, the whole town would know what their respectable banker really was. Preacher May's tent sat on the edge of town where the permanent church was still being built, stone by slow stone. Canvas walls glowed with lamplight as Cade approached, the ledger still pressed against his ribs beneath his coat. Dawn was an hour off, maybe less. The sky had that quality of darkness that knew its time was ending. May stood outside, pouring water from a pitcher into a basin. She didn't look surprised to see him. Figured you'd come. She dried her hands on a towel. Sheriff's got half the town looking for you. I know. You got what you went for? Cade pulled the ledger out, held it in both hands like evidence at trial. 12 families, all the same pattern. Loans they couldn't repay turned into land drums sold for fortunes. May took the ledger, opened it, read by lamplight. Her face went hard as she turned pages. When she looked up, her eyes held something fierce in Old Testament. This'll destroy him. That's the idea. And when he's destroyed, what then? May set the ledger on the small table inside her tent. You planning to kill him? The question landed flat and direct. Cade's hand drifted to the knife at his belt. Habit, not intent. Thought about it. I expect you did. May gestured to a stool. Sit. You look like you're held together with spite and stubbornness. He sat, the exhaustion of the night suddenly heavy on him. His ribs throbbed where the bandages pulled tight. May poured coffee from a pot that had been sitting on coals, handed him a tin cup. The smell was strong enough to wake the dead. I killed men in the war, Cade said quietly. More than I can count. Told myself it was different because we wore uniforms, and someone official said it was necessary. He stared into the coffee. But I seen what violence does. Seen how it spreads like rot. You kill one man thinking it'll solve things, and it just creates 10 more problems. So why you thinking about it now? Because legal ain't working. Law's supposed to protect folks like Ruth, but it don't. It protects men like Drum who know how to twist words on paper. His voice went rough. Sometimes I think the only language men like that understand is the language of consequence. Real consequence. May settled onto a crate across from him. Outside, a rooster crowed early, confused by the lamplight perhaps. The sound was lonely in the pre-dawn quiet. You know what happened to my husband? May asked. Cade shook his head. He was a good man, gentle, ran a freight business in Missouri. One of his partners cheated him, took money meant for suppliers, blamed my husband when the debts came due, ruined him, ruined us. She held her cup with both hands. My husband went to that man's house with a gun, was going to kill him, make him pay for what he'd done. What stopped him? Me. I asked him one question. Will killing him give us back what we lost? May's eyes held Cade's. Answer was no. Killing that man would have just made my husband a murderer, would have taken away the one thing that man's cheating couldn't touch, my husband's soul. So the cheater got away with it? For a time. May smiled, grim. But word got around about what he'd done. His other partners found out. They ruined him legal, pulled their money, spread the truth. He lost everything without a shot being fired. She leaned forward. Justice came. Just came slower than my husband wanted. Cade drank coffee, the bitterness matching his mood. Ruth don't have time for slow. Auctions today. Which is why you got that ledger. Why Ezra's preparing his forge. May's voice softened. You want justice or revenge, Cade? Because they ain't the same thing. Justice restores. Revenge just breaks different things. The words sat between them like stones. I want her to keep her land, Cade said finally. Want her boy to grow up knowing his father was an honorable man who didn't sign away his family's future. Want Drum to answer for what he's done. He looked up. But part of me, the part that remembers every man I failed to save in the war, that part wants to hurt him. Wants to make him feel what Ruth felt standing on those church steps with nobody willing to help. That's honest, at least. May stood, moved to the tent opening. The sky was lighter now, stars fading. But here's what you need to understand. If you kill Drum, you become the story. You become the violent drifter who murdered a respectable banker. Everything in that ledger gets forgotten while folks talk about your crime. But if you expose him public, make him answer in front of the community he's been cheating, then he's the story. His crimes, his guilt. Cade stood slowly, every muscle protesting. The anvil test. Fire reveals truth. Always has. May turned back to him. Can you trust the town to do right once they see what's real? I don't know. Neither do I, but I know this. You give them the chance to be better, or you confirm their worst suspicions about outsiders and violence. Your choice. The tent flap moved in a breeze that carried the smell of coming dawn, dust and sage, and the distant promise of heat. Cade touched the ledger where it sat on the table. You'll stand witness? He asked. I'll do more than that. I'll ring the church bell. May's smile was small, but real. Folks hear that bell outside of regular times. They come running, curiosity if nothing else. Ezra's forge was already hot when Kate arrived, coals glowing red-orange in the pre-dawn dark. The blacksmith had been working since midnight, building the fire to the temperature needed for the test. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the early hour chill. "Got it?" Ezra asked. Cade handed over the ledger. Ezra flipped through it, lips moving as he read. When he finished, he set it carefully on the anvil like it was something sacred. "This'll hold up?" "If the ink on Ruth's deed runs and the ink in this ledger matches the style, and the ink on Calloway's real signature don't run." Ezra selected an iron rod, thrust it deep into the coals. "Then yeah, it'll hold up to any honest eye." Samuel appeared from the shadows, moving quiet as a ghost. He carried something wrapped in cloth, his father's war letter, the one with the authentic signature. The boy's eyes were wide but steady. "Ma said you'd need this?" Cade took the letter, unfolded it carefully. Calloway's handwriting stared back, honest and plain. The signature at the bottom matched the inventory lists Ruth had shown him, nothing like the bold forgery on the deed. "Your pa was a good man," Cade said. "I know." Samuel's voice didn't waver. "That's why I'm here, to watch people remember it." Behind them, the first pale light touched the horizon. In the distance, a church bell began to ring, not the regular call to service, but something urgent. 3 peals, a pause, then 3 more. The old frontier signal for gathering, for witnessing, for judgment. People would be waking now, pulling on clothes, stepping into the street to see what the commotion was about. They'd come curious or they'd come concerned, but they'd come. Ezra pulled the iron from the forge. It glowed white-hot, the air around it shimmering. "Time to see if truth's stronger than fear," he said. Ruth appeared then, walking steady despite the tremor in her hands. She'd dressed in her Sunday clothes, hair pinned eye-tight, the bruise on her face still visible but worn now like a badge instead of a shame. Behind her, townspeople began to gather, first a trickle, then more, drawn by the bell and by something in the air that felt like weather changing. Drum pushed through the crowd, Sheriff Wade beside him. His face was red with fury, barely contained. "This is a legal assembly," Drum announced. "Cadigan's a thief and a vandal. Wade, arrest him." The sheriff's hand moved toward his gun. Preacher May stepped between them, Bible held high. "This is church business now, Silas. We're settling a dispute the old way, before God and witnesses." Drum's eyes went to the forge, to the ledger sitting on the anvil, to the iron glowing white in Ezra's hand. Understanding dawned on his face, followed by something that might have been fear. "You can't." "We can," May said, "and we will." The crowd pressed closer, a wall of bodies and judgment. The sun broke the horizon, painting everything in shades of brass and fire. It was time. The crowd formed a half circle around the forge, pressed close enough to feel the heat radiating from the coals. Faces Cade recognized from the general store, from church, from passing on the street, all watching now with the peculiar intensity of people witnessing something that might change everything or might change nothing, depending on what came next. Preacher May stood at the anvil's head like she was addressing Sunday service. Her voice carried clear in the morning stillness. Proverbs 11, verse 1, "The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him." She set her Bible down. "We're here to weigh truth against lies. Fire's been testing metal since the first smithy. Today it'll test paper." Drum pushed forward, Sheriff Wade at his shoulder. "This is a mockery of legal process. That ledger was stolen from my office." "Was it stolen?" May interrupted. "Or was it evidence of crimes you've been hiding?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Drum's face went darker. "I demand you return my property immediately." "We'll return it," Cade said, his voice carrying despite his damaged ribs. "Soon as we see if what's written in it matches what's written on Mrs. Calloway's deed." Ruth stood to the side. Samuel pressed close against her. She held the deed in both hands, the paper that claimed to bear her dead husband's signature, the paper that had been used to steal her life. Ezra lifted the white-hot iron rod from the forge. Heat shimmered around it, distorting the air. The smell of hot metal mixed with coal smoke and human sweat. "Old frontier law," Ezra announced. "Honest ink holds under heat. Fresh ink, ink added recent, runs like water. Any man here old enough to remember Judge Hastings used this test. Ain't failed yet." "This is absurd," Drum said, but his voice had lost its certainty. He looked at the crowd, searching for support, found mostly curious faces, waiting. "Then you got nothing to fear," May said. If that signature's real, the test'll prove it. Cade stepped forward, holding the deed where everyone could see. John Calloway was my lieutenant in the war. I served under him 3 years. I know his hand. This ain't it. He set the deed on the anvil. The paper looked small against the dark iron, fragile. That's his signature, Drum insisted. Witnessed and recorded. Then watch. Ezra brought the glowing rod close. The crowd held its collective breath. He pressed the iron to the deed, not on the signature yet, but on the printed text at the top. The paper browned immediately, but the ink stayed black and clear, letters sharp. Then Ezra moved the rod down, touched it to the signature. The ink ran. It spread like blood in water, the bold strokes smearing and dissolving, bleeding across the page in dark rivulets that destroyed the confident flourishes. Within seconds, the signature was nothing but a black stain, illegible, ruined. The crowd gasped. A woman's voice said, "Lord have mercy." Drum lunged for the deed. Cade caught his arm, held him back. The banker struggled, but Cade's grip was iron despite his injuries. "Not done yet," Cade said. Samuel stepped forward, his father's letter held carefully in both hands. The boy's voice came clear and steady, older than his years. "This is my pa's real writing, from before he died." He laid the letter beside the ruined deed. The signature at the bottom was plain, simple, nothing like the destroyed forgery. Ezra heated the iron again, thrust it back into the coals until it glowed. When he pulled it out, he touched it to Calloway's authentic signature. The ink held, even as the paper browned and curled at the edges. The signature remained dark and clear. The letters stayed crisp, unchanged. Honest ink set deep into the fiber through months and years, refusing to surrender its truth even to fire. "That's the difference," Ezra said, his voice carrying to the farthest edges of the crowd. "Real versus forged. Truth versus lie." Drum had gone pale. He pulled free from Cade's grip, straightened his coat with shaking hands. "This proves nothing. That letter could be anyone's." "Open your ledger," May said quietly. "I will not." "Open it." Her voice held command despite its softness. "Show them the entries, or I will." For a long moment, Drum stood frozen. Then something in him collapsed. His shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him like water from cracked pottery. May opened the black ledger herself. She read aloud, clear and damning. Mackenzie Farm, equipment delayed, no shipment, foreclosed and sold. Patterson Homestead, crop failed. Foreclosed and sold. Brennan property, loan called early, foreclosed and sold. She looked up. 12 families, all the same pattern, small loans that became impossible debts, land stolen legal and sold for fortunes. She found Ruth's entry, read it word for word, including the part about the equipment never shipped per arrangement, the signature added post-mortem, the expected profit of $14,800. The crowd's murmur grew louder, angry now. Men who'd been silent on the church steps found their voices. "He did that to my brother," someone called. "My uncle lost his farm the same way," another voice added. The storekeeper pushed forward. "You took the Miller place last year. Same story. Loan they couldn't pay, equipment that never came." The wall of complicity was cracking, breaking apart in the light of revealed truth. Sheriff Wade stood very still, his hand no longer near his gun. He looked at Drum, at the ledger, at the crowd pressing closer. His face showed the calculation of a man deciding which side of history to stand on. "Silas Drum," Wade said finally, his voice formal, distant. "I'm placing you under arrest for fraud and forgery. You got the right to remain silent, though I expect you'll want a lawyer." "You can't," Drum started. "I can, and I am." Wade pulled handcuffs from his belt, the metal click loud in the sudden quiet. "You've been playing me for a fool, cousin, making me complicit in theft. That stops now." The cuffs closed around Drum's wrists. The sound was final, irrevocable. Drum looked at the crowd, at faces that had shown him deference for years now showing disgust. He looked at Ruth, at Samuel, at the ruined deed smoking faintly on the anvil. "You think you've won?" His voice came bitter. "You think this changes anything?" "Yeah," Cade said quietly. "It does." Because the crowd was nodding now. Mothers who'd looked away on the church steps were moving toward Ruth, touching her shoulder, whispering apologies. Men who'd kept silent were shaking their heads, angry at themselves as much as at Drum. The storekeeper, careful, cautious Hoskins, stepped forward. "Mrs. Calloway, I believe you'll find your account's been credited. Seems I miscalculated what you owed. You're paid up through the year." One of the ranch hands called out, "I can spare a day's labor. Help fix that stove." A woman offered, "I'll bring supper tonight. No one should cook after a day like this." Small gestures, small voices, but they accumulated like rain and drought, soaking into ground too long dry. Preacher May touched the smoking deed where it lay on the anvil, now worthless as evidence of debt but priceless as proof of crime. "Fire don't lie," she said. "Never has." The sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows. Sheriff Wade led Drum away through a crowd that parted silently, letting judgment pass. Ruth stood at the anvil's side, one hand on Samuel's shoulder. She didn't cry, didn't smile, just breathed, like a woman who'd been holding her breath for years and finally remembered how. The forge fire crackled, consuming the last of the coal. Truth had been tested. Truth had held. Everything else had burned away. The crowd dispersed slowly, folks lingering in small clusters to process what they'd witnessed. The blacksmith yard emptied by degrees. First the curious onlookers, then the families who'd lost land to Drum's schemes, finally the townspeople who'd been complicit through silence and now carried that weight home with them. Sheriff Wade led Drum toward the jail, the banker's wrists still cuffed, his expensive coat dusty from where he'd stumbled. A few people spat as he passed. Most just watched, faces hard with the kind of judgment that comes when a man's true nature gets exposed in daylight. Ezra banked the forge fire, coals settling into ash. The anvil still held heat, the iron surface marked where the rod had rested. He ran a hand over it, respectful, like touching something sacred. "Old ways still work," he said to no one in particular. Cade stood to the side, one hand pressed against his ribs where the bandages had shifted during the confrontation. The pain was sharp but manageable. He'd had worse. Ruth approached, Samuel beside her, the boy still clutching his father's letter. "I don't know how to thank you," Ruth said. "Don't need thanks. I kept a promise, that's all." "It was more than that," her voice caught. "You gave me my husband back. Gave Samuel a father worth remembering instead of a fool who signed away everything." Cade looked down at the boy. Samuel met his eyes, steady and serious. "Pa would have liked you," Samuel said. "I liked him. He was a good officer. Better man." Cade touched the boy's shoulder once, brief. "You got his land now. Make it mean something." "I will." 3 mothers approached then, carrying baskets covered with cloth. The smell of fresh bread and preserved fruit wafted up. One of them, the woman who'd slipped dried apples to Cade at the general store, set her basket at Ruth's feet. "For your table. Ain't much, but it's honest." Another added, "My husband'll come by tomorrow. Help with that fence needs mending." The third woman said nothing, just squeezed Ruth's hand and walked away, wiping her eyes. Preacher May gathered the documents, the ruined deed, the letter, the black ledger. She wrapped them carefully in oilcloth. "These'll go to the territorial court," she said. "Make sure Drum's prosecution sticks, and make sure the other families get their land back if it's still available." "What about the railroad?" Ruth asked. "They were buying the land. Will they come after it still?" "Let them try." May's smile was grim. "Railroad needs easements, not stolen property. They'll negotiate proper now, or they'll face every family in this county united against them." She looked at the dispersing crowd. Funny how folks find courage once one person stands up first. By afternoon, the town had settled into an uneasy new normal. The bank sat closed, a notice on the door about temporary suspension of operations pending investigation. The saloon buzzed with speculation about what would happen to Drum's holdings, who would take over lending, whether the sheriff would keep his job. Cade packed his saddlebags in the small cabin he'd been renting, movements slow and deliberate. Everything he owned fit in 2 bags and a bedroll, a life built for moving, for not putting down roots, easier that way, fewer promises to break when circumstances changed. A knock came at the door. He opened it to find Ezra holding a bundle wrapped in leather. "Made something for you." The blacksmith unwrapped it, revealing a knife in a new sheath. The blade caught light, clean, and sharp, the balance perfect. Old one was getting dull. Figure a man who keeps promises deserves a proper tool. Cade took it, tested the weight. It felt right in his hand, like it had been made specifically for his grip, which it had. "I can't pay for this." "Didn't ask you to." Ezra's eyes crinkled. "Sometimes a debt gets paid by passing it forward. You did that for Ruth. I'm doing it for you." After Ezra left, Cade strapped the knife to his belt. The leather was supple, the stitching tight, work done with care by a man who understood that small things mattered. Sunset painted the Calloway homestead in shades of copper and gold. Cade rode up to find Ruth planting seeds in the cracked earth near the porch, wildflowers, the kind that grew stubborn even in drought. Samuel was inside, the sound of hammering drifting out, the boy fixing something, learning what it meant to maintain rather than just survive. Ruth stood when she heard the horse, wiping dirt from her hands. She looked at Cade's packed saddlebags and didn't ask the question she already knew the answer to. "You're leaving." "Time I moved on." "You could stay. Town could use a man like you." "Town's got what it needs now. Got you. Got folks remembering how to stand together." Cade shifted in the saddle, his bay dancing beneath him, eager for the road. "Besides, staying was never the plan." Ruth reached into her apron, pulled out a cloth bundle. She handed it up to him. The smell of fresh biscuits wafted up, still warm. "For the road." He took them, setting them carefully in his saddlebag. No words seemed adequate, so he just tipped his hat. Samuel appeared in the doorway. The wooden cup he'd been carving finally finished. He held it up, proud. The boy had smoothed away every rough edge, made something useful from a block of wood, and patience. "Holds water now," Samuel called. "Good work," Cade called back. He turned the bay toward the road, toward the horizon where the sun was sinking into layers of purple and orange. Behind him, Ruth returned to her planting, pressing seeds into earth that had seen too little rain, but would bloom anyway, stubborn and hopeful. The boy went back to his hammering, fixing what needed fixing, and Cade rode west, a promise kept, a debt paid, leaving behind only the things he'd mended and the people who'd remember that sometimes one man standing up was all it took to remind others they could stand too. The dust settled slowly on the empty road. Evening came gentle. Somewhere in the gathering dark, a coyote called, wild and free, and the sound carried for miles across land that belonged to those who'd earned it honest. Some debts can't be measured in dollars or days. They come due in the quiet hours when a man's alone with what he's done and what he's failed to do. Kate had carried Calloway's letter for 4 years, the paper growing soft with handling, the promise inside it growing heavier with each passing season. Now the weight was gone, lifted not by violence but by truth shown plain in fire, and witnessed by a community that had forgotten how to see. The law's only as honest as the men who hold the pen. Drum had understood that, had built an empire on the gap between what was legal and what was right. But fire doesn't lie, neither does a man who's seen too much death to abide in justice quietly. Behind him, Ruth's seeds lay in drought-cracked soil, wildflowers that might bloom or might not, depending on rain that might come or might not. The uncertainty didn't matter. What mattered was the planting itself, the act of faith that said tomorrow could be different than today. Samuel's cup would hold water now, mended and smooth where it had been rough. Broken things could be remade if someone cared enough to do the work. Towns, too, maybe. Communities that had looked away could learn to look closer, speak up, stand together. It wouldn't happen overnight. Change came slow as seasons in country like this, but it came. Cade rode until the homestead disappeared behind him, swallowed by distance and gathering dark. The bay knew the rhythm of departure, had traveled enough roads to understand they all led somewhere even when the destination wasn't clear. Above them, stars emerged one by one, ancient and indifferent, marking the same sky they'd marked over battlefields and burnt ground, and the small, quiet places where people tried to build lives worth living. Some men ride through like storms, loud, fierce, then gone. Others pass quiet, leaving only the things they fixed behind them. The dust settled, the night deepened, the land endured, and on it, a woman planted hope, while her boy learned to build instead of break. That was enough. That was everything.